Brett, thanks so much for being here. How are things?
Things are groovy, man. Yeah, no, Goodlawyer's growing, and in spite of all of the turmoil and confusion around politics and borders these days, things are cooking.
Yeah, should we go right into the politics? No, why don't we wait and get warmed up a little bit? So, Goodlawyers, maybe give us a little bit of the backstory, which I think is really something you put out there and talk a lot about. I think I just saw a post of yours that was just sort of referencing that early days as a lawyer and the recognition that the system was broken, something had to change. So maybe you could share a little bit about the backstory.
Mm-hmm, for sure. So it depends how far we want to rewind the clock, but maybe I'll start with I've been an entrepreneur my whole life since I was 4 years old, selling golf balls out of my uncle's backyard in the summer. And I think that sort of deep entrepreneurialism is pretty rare in the world of law. Not a lot of hardcore entrepreneurs are willing to stick it out for 7 years of school. And, I had a mother that hammered education. And then, unfortunately, my dad passed when I was 22, just finishing up my undergrad, and wasn't quite ready to take on the world and go and build something. So law school, frankly, for me was kind of a bit of a backup plan that kept mama happy and, felt like I would be progressing towards something. Fast forward, you get into law school and, they have this interview process, which I think is overly contrived, but it's called OCIs, on-campus interviews. And it's basically all the big law firms coming to the universities and, try to basically pick, what they perceive to be the best students. But it becomes really like this intense sort of rat race, students trying to get jobs, folks feeling like failures if they don't get that big firm job. And, I was one of the fortunate ones that got the job, but if I'm being honest, I didn't actually know what I was getting myself into. It just seemed like everybody, is striving for this thing. I'm a competitive guy. And so I just got sucked into that world and ended up landing at one of the big shops. And, from the early days, it felt like something was a bit off. I was never a fan of, billable hours and somewhat arbitrary targets. But, you're in the meat grinder and, you put your head down and the work is flying at you so quickly, certainly as like an articling student, junior lawyer. You don't really have a lot of time to kind of sit back and think about, is this the right spot for me? Is this where I want to take my career for the, next 20 years? And so that feeling compounded for a number of years and kind of culminated when I was out on what they call a secondment, where I was working inside one of our, big FI clients out in Vancouver. They were nice enough to put me up in Vancouver, which was a good year. But that was the first time that I really had time to think and started listening to podcasts. I bought this Goodlawyer domain in first year law. I didn't know what it was for yet. And when I got back, this idea had started to germinate that maybe there's an opportunity to build a more scalable platform that, fits better for the professionals delivering the service. And then obviously, the clients, the businesses receiving it. The other piece that, just to steal I think it's a Bezos quote, your margin is my opportunity. I was probably the only associate at the firm that, looked at my billable rate and worked it back to what I was putting in my pocket out of that. And, as a fourth year associate or whatever, it was, north of $500 an hour. And when I just did the very simple math, this is how many hours I'm billing, this is what I'm taking home, I was like, I'm only keeping like 10 to 15% of this amount. And that to me was another sort of important piece or insight that I had, that there's a way to deliver extremely high caliber legal services with these, brilliant lawyers across the country that doesn't put 10, 15, 20% of that rate in their pocket. Because, for me, I was asking myself, where's it going? And that was the early days of Goodlawyer, was a fixed fee marketplace, fair economics to the lawyer, the client, and the company. And, that's really where we got our start, was serving startups who frankly didn't have anywhere else to go. So that was kind of the long-winded early days of how Goodlawyer came into being.
Well, I suspect that story can extend for the entire episode if we wanted it to, because you're probably skipping a lot of aspects. But definitely mirrors some of the things I experienced in the accounting firm world, just how they come out to the universities. You get kind of sucked into this recruitment world of, you start wanting something, and I didn't even know why I wanted it, but you're in it. And I always thought of the accounting path as like a means to an end, or a foundation that would help me build upon, and had an entrepreneurial desire. But, at that point, it's like, I want the job, the big four.
Totally.
And then you get in there, I took 20 years to get out of it. That's an exaggeration. It was a long evolution towards, starting CFO Hive, but you didn't take that long. So how many years into working for the firm did you make the leap?
If you're including articling, you can call it like 4.5. And, for me, the idea was percolating, the frustrations were bubbling. And I've told this one a few times before, but the final straw, because I was also sort of known as Mr. Ideas Guy at the firm, which was absolutely not a compliment in that context.
Right.
I was a very noisy associate, which was not typically appreciated.
Like in your posting automation, really, and you got those looks like, dude, hours go down. What do you mean?
What are you talking about? Yeah, like, just shut up, Brett. Shut up.
Yeah.
I'm like, I fix, we quote the deals. Like, it's the same. But it was really one of the senior guys who, in his own way, I think was trying to look out for me. But we just had very different views of what my future should or could look like. And I never forget him coming in my office one day, slamming the door and just saying, Brett, keep coming up with your ideas. Just keep them to yourself. And feeling like I had the muzzle put on at that point was sort of the final straw. And, about 6 months later, I started planning what the exit would look like. I'm not unbelievably rash, but about 6 months later, decided to leave and, start getting to work on building something, what I perceive to be better.
So you talked about marketplace, maybe as sort of the initial structuring of the business. Maybe talk a bit about that, the evolution to now. And was fractional even a term used at that time? Because it feels like there's just been this kind of wave of fractional everything. And I like fractional for many reasons. But was it even a term that was being thrown around at that time?
Not at all. So, when we launched the first version of Goodlawyer, I think it was January or February 2020. And at that time, all we were offering was $39 advice sessions and $25 per page contract reviews. That was like our initial go-to-market. Caught some wind in like the news cycle, not crazy, but lightly, because we, as soon as COVID hit, we launched a campaign. It was our first ever marketing campaign, #wash your hands. And that would give a small business owner, a free sort of advice session with a lawyer to help understand the changing landscape that was moving incredibly quickly as everything's getting shut down and folks are freaking out. And that's really where it started, was just like these tiny little services delivered to entrepreneurs and small businesses that, again, could not go anywhere else. It was before you could ask ChatGPT anything. There's no law firm that would really give you the time of day because, there's no money to be made. But that was really how we started to build this base of clients and, lawyers that, really propelled us to the next phase, which was starting to do larger services. And, at first it was a lot of custom stuff. And then we started creating these fixed fee, product sheets that would clearly define what an entrepreneur could get for $500, or, you need a startup bundle that's going to be $2,500. And, for us, I think that, fixed fee services are becoming a bit more commonplace in the world of law, but still underused in my opinion. But at that time, constantly I would have lawyers telling me like, well, I don't know how much it's going to cost. It depends. And I would ask them, like, haven't you done 1,000 shareholder agreements before? And back in undergrad, I ran a painting franchise, and that's what I learned how to estimate. And I'm like, we're a service provider. I'm the expert. Why can I not give you a price, or at least a price range, on how much it's going to cost me to deliver this service I have done 1,000,000 times before, and actually absorb some of the risk associated with delivering the service? The accountants are a bit better at it because you guys track your time, but you're typically giving a price up front, and then, at least the big four, working it back so your pricing gets better with time. In law, we've been really lazy, where we're just saying, we're going to hit the timer. Here's the rate. I'll let you know what the price is at the end of it. And, that just was so unpalatable from a business owner's perspective. Coming back around to your question about fractional, not a clue. Didn't have a clue what fractional was in the early days of Goodlawyer. And really for us, it emerged directly from clients asking for it, not by name, but, some of those startups that we worked with at inception, were growing alongside us, getting bigger. And I remember having conversations with a couple of our biggest clients at that time, these fast moving, growing scale ups. And they were basically like, Brett, love Goodlawyer, really love the lawyer we're working with, but getting a fixed fee quote every single time I have a sales contract or, an issue pop up is getting really cumbersome and annoying. Can I just buy a block of the lawyer's time on a recurring basis? And so in those early days, I was just calling it like custom quotes, monthly engagement or something like that. And we started doing a handful of those. And around that same period, I started bumping into some of you guys, some of these fractional CFOs, and it instantly clicked. I'm like, oh my God, we're just doing that, but for GCs. And that's where, we started rolling out the marketing and the positioning with respect to, being Canada's leader for fractional general counsel. And I am quite certain we were not the first legal service provider to call it fractional GC, but I can tell you that when we did, I started to see just an insane number of lawyers adopting that terminology on LinkedIn and elsewhere. And so, I don't think we invented it. I hadn't heard it before, but we definitely propelled that whole fractional GC concept across Canada in a way that, I think the market was a little bit unfamiliar with it prior to.
Yeah, that's awesome. It sounds like you're attributing to CFOs, at least where you heard it from. It'll be interesting to trace it back to like, when was this first used? But
I think it was you guys.
Okay. And to make it clear, I'm not saying CFO Hive. We weren't around, but I too in my career hadn't really come across it. And then I was CFO in a private company, venture backed, scale up, and we were going public. And that's probably when I first came across it. I was referred to what were called fractional CFOs, and I needed help to get listed, get a prospectus done, get our books, IFRS ready. And there's just something about the framing of it that was kind of better than the part-time. And it was sort of just invoking the sense of, the expertise. Like you're not sacrificing the expertise that you're getting. It's you're taking a portion of it and accessing a portion of it. And there's something about that. But I guess that also ties to so your client interest in this work was evident as they grew. They said, "Hey, we want I don't know if the all you can eat versus the a la carte, but they definitely didn't want to have the fixed fees on every time they engaged." They probably also wanted someone that got to know them and liked the idea of that person being theirs, embedded more so. But also on the sort of supply side, let's call it, this shift that you've probably seen evolve significantly in lawyers that are interested in this kind of work. Talk about that and how that's impacted your business and the marketplace as far as other lawyers that say this is the path I want to take. And I would just add, earlier in their career, it's not just folks on the cusp of retirement that I think CFOs predominantly were those interested in fractional, but now a lot of mid-career, earlier career. Talk about the evolution you're seeing.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's definitely moved from perhaps, sort of late stage, close to retirement to, prime time. And I think there's a variety of reasons why it's become so popular. I think in, the context of legal, which, is probably most similar to accounting of all of the professions, but, kind of going back to that, journey from law school into the big firm, there was always a very clear second path that a corporate lawyer could take apart from, the partner track at a big firm. And that was to go in-house. And, that's probably the most by far common sort of off-ramp for corporate lawyers that, come up in the big firms and then end up working in, a full-time in-house role. And for one, there's not enough full-time in-house roles to go around, although there's more now than ever before because those in-house teams continue to grow. But there was no alternative. It was all or nothing. And for, these extremely talented professionals that might have something else going on in their life, it could be, they're trying to run their own small business. They could be, trying to raise a family. They could be, more and more we see, they're taking care of, their elder parents now. They want to travel. A multitude of reasons why flexibility has become and continues to become more and more important. And I think the idea that you don't, the options in, the world of corporate law are you leave it and don't work at all. And, especially when I was at the firm, you saw a ton of lawyers and, in particular, a ton of women leave because the, 60, 70 hours a week was not going to fly when they wanted to, have kids and raise a family, or the in-house roles that, again, were always perceived to be sort of the less intense route. Those roles have become more and more sort of pressurized and, intense as the years progress, and just providing an option to, again, this incredible talent that wasn't all or nothing. That's really what was super attractive to a lot of these folks in the early days. I think as we've progressed and continued to move up market and serving, some massive enterprise clients now across the country, there is another strong argument that, one of our leaders on our team, Chad Abood, I just heard him talking to a potential enterprise client right before this call, and he had a great sort of analogy he used, which is the financial motivator. If you're a landlord and you can lease out, the entire building or the entire floor to one tenant, it's secure and, you're making money. But if you can confidently cut that piece of real estate up into multiple pieces, there's actually an opportunity to increase revenues if you have the certainty that you can fill that whole plate with these fractional mandates, as I'm sure you've experienced with CFO Hive. And that ability to, again, not have to sort of dedicate your entire life being to the career, which is more or less what it takes to become partner in the biggest shops in the country, and your opportunity to, maximize your financial outcome through these fractional engagements without having to, spread yourself incredibly thin if you're running like your own solo shop, which, a few of us crazy lawyers do, but very few, because that risk aversion is high, and, starting from zero and trying to build your own shop is incredibly difficult. But that ability to work for, call it 2, 3, 4 awesome clients, be the legal leader, and really have this sort of, in my view, kind of best of both worlds, where you get to be your own boss, you get huge financial rewards relative to a in-house job, say, and then you also have the ability to go deep with a small subset of clients. So you get variety, but you get to be involved at a strategic level. To me, that is like sort of the dream case. And if I wasn't building Goodlawyer, I'd probably be a fractional GC working with some tech scale-ups.
Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, a lot of parallels for sure that I've seen on the finance side. Yeah, talk a bit about you. You alluded to it that you've shifted and now are supporting a lot of enterprise clients. I suspect you still have the earlier stage as a big part of your focus. So talk about the kind of nature of your client base. Presumably you're sort of across industries and agnostic in that regard, but earlier stage to enterprise and in between, maybe a little bit on that.
For sure. So, I mean, over the last, call it 5 years, Goodlawyer has served roughly 5,000 businesses across the country. The vast majority of those being, entrepreneurs, small businesses, startups. In the past 2 to 3 years, since that emergence in our business of fractional GC, we have really oriented in that direction and are very focused these days on serving. We still do have the marketplace serving the small businesses, but all of the growth in the business and the focus is on serving that mid-market to enterprise space. So it has really changed the dynamic in terms of what we're able to offer our talent base, the good lawyers in our network, and who we're going after on a day-to-day basis, and the value prop that we're delivering. Fixed fee, cost-effective legal services, early days to startups, all the way up to now. Cost is always an important consideration, but the sophistication of the talent has morphed entirely in terms of what we're looking for. Put it this way, I am certainly not a good enough lawyer to be in the Goodlawyer network. There's no way. And that to me has been honestly a bit surprising, the caliber of lawyers that are coming inbound on a weekly basis. We're probably getting 8 to 10 qualified corporate lawyers, ranging from that kind of like 50-year big law associate to the former GC of a multinational coming in the door because they're intrigued, because they're looking for some flexibility. They've heard about us through the community and are drawn to this sort of innovative collection of lawyers that we've been fostering for the past 5 years. And it is truly surprising that this caliber of lawyer, who could go and be a partner tomorrow at a big law firm, or could probably walk into another extremely senior role in a huge enterprise, just don't want to do that. And I think that there are personalities and stages of life where those types of roles work great, but for the folks that are coming to us, they're really looking for something different, something new. And that's a journey that we're still on, and it will continue to morph. But I'd say, that biggest change, apart from going from marketing led to sales led, has been just that caliber of talent, and trying to not provide them with, I kind of viewed it in the early days as sort of like skip the dishes, where like you've got the restaurant and then Skip is like helping fill capacity in the kitchen with orders that we're able to drive to you really efficiently, to this is a whole new career path that is real, is super tangible, and allows you to kind of walk away as a lawyer from everything else you're doing and just like fully embrace this fractional model.
Couldn't agree more. Like the caliber would also be, for me, Brett, the thing that I've recognized as like the greatest part of the opportunity here. which I think is different than it was 10 years ago in the finance realm as well. Like there were folks dedicated to contract and getting into the space, but the caliber now, it's sort of unlimited because you've got these former,
it's prime time.
Yeah, big four or beyond. I don't know if it's just big four, but the top firms and folks that are approaching retirement have been shifting towards a day or two they maybe want to golf or have more flexibility, and then post pandemic how people work has really changed. I think the playing field and how people think about work, because we could do so much more remotely, and people want that control and that flexibility. And so, yeah, for me as well. And I think you might be similar, and you can speak to it. But for me, the network aspect is non-exclusive. I independently contract with CFOs, and there's reasons you'd like that and reasons you wouldn't. But for me, the access to the sort of unparalleled caliber of talent you get, it makes it worthwhile 100%. And so then it's the challenge, I think, of education in the marketplace around, hey, this talent is here and available to help. And so you're sort of displacing former ways of thinking. Like if I get to a certain size, I need to call a certain type of firm. Well, no, those same exact people without that margin you were talking about before
totally
are here to help. And so, yeah.
100%. And I mean, I think I'm consistently surprised at how much education is still required for the market. Like I said, got off an enterprise call right before this one, and the executive that we're working with there, before we met them, completely unaware of fractional or flexible legal services and like the whole space that we're playing in. In his mind, it was big firm until I can go through an extended, hopefully 90-day recruiting process, with like fairly expensive recruiting services to, bring those folks in the door. And this whole middle ground between big firm or FTE was just completely off his radar. Didn't exist in his brain until, we got to talking to him. So there is this still enormous opportunity, we call it the ALSP space in the world of law, alternative legal service provider. There's an enormous opportunity to continue educating the market. And, I think we've had extraordinary traction on the supply side, where like supply has not been a material bottleneck for a really long time, but continuing to educate clients and these larger and larger businesses, this option exists. These are the benefits. If you're looking for part-time, you can rationalize it against a big firm hourly rate, and you're looking at like a 70 to 80% drop off because of the dramatically more efficient model we're able to deliver. And then even when you're thinking about longer term or close to full-time engagements, which start to look a little bit less like fractional and a little bit more like secondments, like I did back in the day, there is an incredibly I would say competitive price structure that we're able to deliver that, doesn't just make it easier for the exec looking to fill a role, but actually if they're talking to the CFO like you, makes a hell of a lot of sense on, the cost benefit side from just a strictly cash perspective. So our model is very similar to yours, non-exclusive, and for the exact reasons that you articulated, which is why put handcuffs or blockers in the way of the best talent. And I would say the majority of competitors in my space in Canada and the US do tie up the lawyers to exclusives. And, I think that is a hugely limiting approach. And, my thesis from day one has been, I'm not going to force you to do anything as a lawyer. Everything is opt-in, but I'm going to make it so good that you want to. And it also forces us to continue just delivering as much value, whether it's the types of mandates we're getting, the clients we're working with, or some of the service offerings and support systems we create on the back end. I'm just going to try to keep delivering as much value as I can to this professional. And hopefully they keep coming back for more.
We're speaking the same language. I think that exclusivity.
Peas in a pod.
Well, yeah, because it's like, once you, let's say, fulfill that capacity and serve up, filling up the capacity that you have, then the exclusivity doesn't even matter. Because if you could do so, then they would be exclusive to, the kind of clients you can bring them. And you said, your margin's my opportunity. I think the same thing. If you are focused on the exclusive model, that's your opportunity to tap into folks that don't want to be exclusive with somebody at this stage per se. And so I'm a big fan of getting to the right talent and accessing, and not all professionals are of the same level of talent, and for different situations, different folks are going to be really suitable. And just like you said, you knew that you weren't the best at certain things in law. There was always someone better. Not to put words in your mouth, something to that effect. But I felt that way as a CFO. And when we were going public, I'm like, okay, well, I've never done this. I'm Googling and I'm like, I'm sure I could figure it out, but that's not the most efficient path, for the business. So knowing that there are experts out there that you can tap into. And the other part is hiring is hard. I'm sure it's the case with GCs as well. Like when you even get to a place where you can hire full-time GC, that's a tough hire. Because what are your needs now and down the road? And are you getting someone that can cover the bases? And also, I guess the math has changed, right? On like what used to be the point at which a full-time GC would make sense. Well, the point at which a fractional GC makes sense is a lot sooner.
Way sooner.
Way sooner. So what does that look like for a business? When you meet a company, you understand where they are and what those needs look like. So let's say beyond the startup stage, they're at a stage where they're need more than just sort of the getting started package. What do those discussions start to look like? Maybe just provide a little bit of color, a little bit more tangible for the audience.
Yeah. So classic lawyer answer. It depends. It does. I think there are some startups that are playing in, or scale ups. The line between startup and scale up is incredibly fuzzy, but I would lean towards you got to be kind of in a scaling phase to start really thinking about a fractional GC. Some companies that are in highly regulated spaces, and our roommates at TELUS Sky, Zayzun, they're a great example, playing in a very regulated space in Canada and the US, and
could be pre-revenue.
Their GC. Yeah, definitely. I think he might have been their 10th employee, the GC, full time. Yeah. Outside of those highly regulated, if I just had to kind of throw a dart at the board and give you an approximation, I would say typically, just using the employees as the proxy, somewhere between kind of 30 and 50, generally speaking, if you're thinking about sort of the tech side of things, more so Series A and up is starting to, that's where we start to see the need. Because you don't at the end of the day, we're not even really competitive with big firms anymore. There's certainly a lot of overlap in what we do, but the stuff that they do well is the big transactions and the big disputes. The stuff that we do excellently is, the operational legal needs and, sales contracts, employee matters, regulatory sort of deep dives and bringing out the rules and then embedding them into the product and working with the tech guys. All the stuff that, an embedded in-house lawyer would do is very different than where the big firms excel. So in that kind of 30 to 50 employee range is where I'd say we see the entry point with most scale-ups. And, a fractional GC could carry you for a very long way. It highly contingent on the space you're playing in. Do you have a lot of B2B complex sales agreements? You're going to, need more in-house horsepower earlier than if you're, more consumer oriented and, you don't have a lot of contracts flying around. So I would say most often, again, with some of those highly regulated spaces being an exception, a fractional GC comes after a fractional CFO. You guys typically, from what I've seen, get in there earlier. I would say the vast majority of, these scale up and mid-market clients that we're working with, where we are embedding the first legal person on their team in this fractional way. we're either, that lawyer is typically reporting into a CFO, like a full-time CFO, or sometimes a COO, CEO sometimes as well. But I would say most often they have a fairly formed executive team, and the fractional GC is like another, professional coming in to augment that team, provide some of that legal flavor to the strategic conversations, and then the horsepower just to deal with, the flow of contracts or whatever's going on in the business, still likely using external for that Series B or that Series C to come later, but bringing all of, what should be in-house legal work properly in-house.
Right. No, that's a great call out. And so CFOs, I think, having that as a tool in the toolkit, so to speak, but when they're thinking about more efficient ways for the business to operate, it's probably pretty easy to look at your legal spend and think about what that would look like with a fractional individual. And even if you got to the same figure in terms of cost, then you kind of look at the upside from having somebody embedded in the business on a, ongoing cadence.
Yeah, then the CFO or the COO isn't pretending to be a lawyer on weekends, and the contracts are stronger, the terms are better, and I would say a value prop that almost always exists is bringing that legal spend in-house, which it doesn't take long if you're using external regularly to find those savings that justify all of the added value that they see from a fractional GC, probably much similar to what they see with you guys on the fractional CFO front.
For sure. Yeah, that's a good point about CFOs acting as lawyers. They toe that line.
And I didn't tell you this, but I do have an accounting degree, and I went through that Big Four recruiting process and almost went to KPMG before I reversed course and decided to go to law school.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, yeah, I did go to KPMG, so that's pretty funny. We almost crossed paths, and then here we've come back. Yeah, I know a lot of, I guess, recovering accountants and lawyers, but you said there aren't that many that are sort of innovative minded. But then again, when you just work back from some really successful entrepreneurs, a lot of them do have that legal background.
Definitely.
In certain industries that I've come across, probably more so than accountants. So it's kind of interesting.
But accountants and lawyers, I would say, are probably the two most common skill sets that you see, at the highest levels of executive in a variety of areas. Practicing law for, 4 years and change really did sharpen my pencil, so to speak, and definitely, made me more detail oriented in a good way. And, did just sort of flesh out my kind of entrepreneurial skill set with a little bit more nuance and depth when it came to, again, understanding what a contract looks like. And, if you understand what a contract means and you can read a balance sheet, you're pretty dangerous. And so I think, having that sort of professional background is a weapon for folks that, find themselves in, more business heavy executive roles down the line. And I think the best example of that was listening to a pod the other day, and Harley Finkelstein from Shopify. He was a lawyer for about 10 minutes, but he did it weirdly, intentionally, or at least that's how the story goes now, that, he wanted to sharpen his pencil before making his way into the business world. And safe to say they're doing okay.
It's funny. He plays that up for sure, the background.
Oh,
and
yeah.
I think it's part of the brand, and he definitely shares that story. And I haven't listened to that much of him, but just because the few things I have listened to, he definitely talks about that. So it comes off as more than 10 minutes. Wow. But again, I'm sure it does truly serve.
And if he's listening, Harley, Shopify is top of my hit list. So I'm coming for you.
Yeah, and keep it up. He's doing great stuff, and he puts himself out there in a really great way.
100%.
In fact, it was his podcast where I think it was Ed Sunshine who was Yeah, I think it was him who's the former lawyer, and he left left practice I think in his mid 40s or something, and he's a billionaire entrepreneur. So yeah, he's had some inspirational people on that podcast he's been doing.
Charlie Munger was a lawyer for a huge chunk of his career as well, I think, and I think he left the firm he was at when he was in his 40s too.
Yeah, we got to put a list together, maybe curate a list of lawyers and CPAs that have made it big, and just kind of put some inspiration out there for our
I like that. I like that a lot, actually.
Yeah. What podcast do you like? Can you share a couple that you got on your playlist?
For sure. First one that pops to mind is called Founders. And I don't know if you've listened to that one, but the guy basically does a deep dive into the autobiographies of, the world's kind of most successful founders over the years. It's amazing. I feel like I should probably be reading more of those autobiographies, but getting the Cole's notes in an hour-long podcast on my way to the office or whatever is extremely valuable, inspiring, and just generally speaking, entertaining. Invest Like the Best is another really good one. And then the podcast that, if I'm being honest, got the ball rolling in terms of thinking about startups at all was back when I was on that secondment in Vancouver. And I don't listen to it as much these days, but How I Built This by Guy Raz, that was my first startup podcast that I remember just listening to every day, taking the train in and out. And that was really what got the gears turning on. What is this startup thing all about? And starting to map it to the inefficiencies I saw in the legal world, and kind of marrying those two things to eventually start Goodlawyer.
Yeah, that's a great list. And I think that's going to become a standing question for this podcast. Because it's hard to sift through the noise. Like Founders, I think I've got like a good number of those episodes in my, queue. And then I kind of always find myself, you just jump around and, finding recommendations for, not just great podcasts, but great episodes. I think we maybe can help curate some of that for folks.
Every episode is not equal.
Every episode is not equal. And, the upside is huge. And sometimes when you're hearing a great episode of something, you're just like, man, like, how many lunch or coffees have you had conversations with folks, and, every now and then you have one where you're like, wow, that was amazing. Like I absorbed. And these podcasts kind of give you this opportunity to become, not an active part, but to listen in on conversations that are just so inspiring and informative. So, really glad we covered that.
And people often ask me, because I'm sure you've been inundated with it. I post a lot on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And people are asking me kind of like, how do you have time to be putting out, multiple posts a week? And, the secret sauce is I listen to a lot of podcasts which spark ideas. I write them down in like my notes thing. Now we got ChatGPT to help expedite the process a little bit, but that's it. Listening, hearing something, feeling, momentarily inspired, writing down a note, and then spending, 10, 15 minutes on making it, sound nice and jive. And like the building in public and LinkedIn in particular have been really key to the growth of, the Goodlawyer brand and our ability to tell our story to the right people. And those little nuggets that I'm pulling out of podcasts on a weekly basis, like really are kind of like the fuel that feeds that LinkedIn train. I love them. I probably listen to too many of them. But I don't see myself slowing down anytime soon.
Yeah, no, likewise. I was going to ask you about the social media because you're doing a phenomenal job. And I guess as you've grown and your team is out there and, you do so many things that I think are just kind of looks like you're having a blast at it as a group. So I love seeing that. And then certainly, the content you share and the value and the education. You talked about education in the market. How do you kind of think about your audience? Because it's sort of a broad business audience, I would think. But when you put together a post and you go out to write one of those, nuggets of information that you wanted to share, are you thinking about your audience in mind, or are you just always thinking about, hey, this has helped me and let me share?
I'm probably less strategic about it than I could be, to be honest. I write things that I find interesting. A lot of that is sharing, what's going on at Goodlawyer. We're hosting another yacht party, trying to get people excited about some of these community building initiatives we run on a pretty aggressive and recurring basis. But when it comes to the podcast nuggets and dare I say some of the thought leadership stuff, that's just things that I'm genuinely interested in and are top of mind. Wrote one last night in bed, I sleep pretty good, but couldn't fall asleep, and just wrote one in bed about leadership because there was a, tough conversation I had to have with, one of the execs on my team. Everything's good. Part of building a business is a willingness to have those conversations and, be productive about it. But, just talk through sort of my process that, started with me feeling slightly enraged, almost making a phone call that, would have been suboptimal, taking some time to reflect, having, getting the opinions of a couple other folks, and then having a conversation that, wasn't reactive, made the point that I wanted to make, but was done in a way that, I think it was received a lot better than, my default. What the fuck are you doing? Told you I'd drop one.
Yes. That's staying in.
And that's I think been a huge part of my personal journey in the last, call it 12 months, bringing on some coaches onto my team. Not literally employees on my team, but in sort of Brett and Goodlawyer's corner, and the VMSA has been great. Venture Mentor Service Alberta. Shout out to Coach John, who is a very seasoned entrepreneur, and I don't know why he does it, but he takes a few entrepreneurs under his wing and tries to share some of the lessons he's learned over the years. And then I would say beyond my sort of business, personal coaches that have been helping me evolve as a CEO. One of the strange but remarkably impactful moves I made probably almost a year ago now was actually bringing on my brother, who is a psychologist. Have you seen Billions?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's my fractional Wendy Rose.
No, not Wendy. Wendy, yes.
Yeah. He's my fractional Wendy. So we own him every Tuesday, and he comes in and
really,
we're doing group therapy with the executive team. All under kind of the performance coaching umbrella, but it's definitely borderline or highly directed, therapy at times. And I rolled it out in a fully optional way. We started with a few of the execs who were on board, grew that into all the execs when they saw the kind of benefits that, we were enjoying out of it. And now it's rolled out to the entire team. And if I'm not mistaken, every single person is doing it. Fully optional. Every single person is doing it. We decided that me and my brother doing one-on-ones probably wasn't going to work. The last one was, Brett, I'm not the one in the chair. So we do ours in a bit more ad hoc fashion.
Right.
But I think just investing in that and recognizing that, we're a bunch of human, what is a company? It's just a bunch of humans with, varying degrees of sort of clear direction, alignment, trying to build something together. And so getting in front of any of the interpersonal or, insecurity things that can slow you down has been, worth every penny. And I love the fact that I get to work with my brother now too. It's amazing. But really, I've been truly blown away at how impactful having someone like that in your business on a fractional basis has been to, our growth as a company and my growth as a leader.
Hey, what a phenomenal thing to share, because you're obviously a believer in accessing talent and expertise that you may not otherwise be able to access in a fractional manner. I wrote down fractional Wendy here because that's just really cool. I love that. And I think really helps folks who are building something, and there's an evolution in your own practice and how that looks, and recognizing some of the things that may have served me at the very beginning. Maybe I need to grow and evolve how I lead and how I run this business. And so that self-awareness, I think, is huge, and then going to ask for help. So love all of that. Super, honest and transparent, and I think really helpful. So really, really helpful.
The substance of what I'm trying to get across, I would say, is, certainly not always right, but often it's the right direction, or it's like the right point to make, where my sort of deficiency has consistently been is on the delivery. And, I'm trying to make a point, but how I'm making that point is often taken not in the way that I necessarily intended. So as an example, I say something in a meeting, and, I think CEOs, or, if you're the founder, like you got to be conscious that your words and your actions mean a lot to everybody in the company. Maybe, unfortunately, disproportionately so. And I can often like share my feedback or thoughts on something that comes off extremely critical when I'm actually in like a collaborating mindset. And so figuring out how to deliver my feedback, and, there was a period where I started wearing a backwards hat to like try to highlight, I'm not trying to like dictate things here. I'm just in the room collaborating. Has been, an important lesson for me, and certainly an area that I think everyone on my team would tell you is still a work in progress.
Well, you know what? On that note, I just think, everyone recognizing we're all work in progresses, and our businesses and ourselves, and just kind of that evolution. And so whether it's podcasts or, conversations we have, just having that self-awareness, and I thinking about how can we continue to get better and evolve, and how we help, and that serves our businesses, our clients, the CFOs and lawyers we respectively work with, and just kind of building that ecosystem to continue to get better. And I also think just that
Totally.
That abundance mindset, and there's just so many opportunities out there to help in what we do. And so even the way you talked about the sort of incumbent, like the legal industry itself, that while there's a lot of crossover, there's not really like as much competitiveness. There's different strengths that you play to. So it's not sort of a zero-sum game. And I kind of view that just in general, I think, is a good mindset to have. So
100%.
Obviously you bring that. Anything else you want to share that we didn't cover that you think you'd want?
Just to double tapping that note was, I think that's an attitude that we need more of in Canada. And, I think that we are a country full of like incredibly bright, hardworking people. And I think, where we could index more is dreaming bigger, and, not viewing things as zero sum, and really understanding that, we're in a big global market, and there are ways to grow the pie with folks that at first blush, it might be, not totally obvious. We've got a partnership coming down the pipe that I would say fits directly in that kind of theme. So stay tuned on that front. But the last thing I'll just say is, you're an accountant, you'll appreciate, the power of compound interest, and having a business model like Fractional that, isn't as transactional as typical professional services, is a, significantly more entrenched, embedded, and, that from our perspective of, the owners of our businesses, provides this amazing compounding effect over time. And, being able to kind of grow with the businesses you're working with, and continue to, facilitate their needs as they grow and evolve, as you grow and evolve. So love compound interest, love a compound business. But for me, the number one most important sort of compounding aspect of a business is the people in it. And, I think the greatest strength of Goodlawyer has been the fact that we have this weirdly large core group, many of whom I've known since I was 10 years old, that, came on board at different times in the journey. But most importantly, we've stuck together and we keep growing as individuals. We keep growing as contributors to the business, and being able to keep everybody and, experience the benefits of all of that compounding knowledge and skill sets. That's really what I think has gotten us here, and what I see is going to take us to the next level.
The power of compounding. I love it. Before we go, Brett, last thing I want to ask you about is you mentioned the yacht party. Where on earth do you come up with the idea to do a yacht party? And is this like from Billions again? And how big is the yacht now, or for the next party?
So we'll be bringing the yacht back for the first time in Vancouver during Web Summit Vancouver, and the first three were all in Toronto, connected to the Collision conference, which has now moved to Vancouver and rebranded. But the idea actually came from a startup guy out of Toronto who's been kind of in the startup world for probably as long as I've been alive. And he was in Calgary with some other folks. I remember, it was I got invited to, a dinner that frankly I had no business being at Bodex, like a ton of like really cool companies and leaders, including the two guys that basically ran the Collision conference and brought it to Toronto, who were in town. And I remember sitting there having some drinks and just asking Sunil, is his name. Sunil, I want to do something big at Collision. I think it's a big party. Because I did have some insight that the after parties were like a major component of the conference. And I was just like, how do I do that? How do I throw the biggest, baddest party in Toronto during this, 30,000 person conference? And he's like, I think you should rent a boat. And that kicked off a bit of a rabbit hole we went down. We ended up partnering with someone locally on that first one, and, turned into 500 people on. Yacht is a hilarious stretch of the word yacht. It was like more of a giant fishing boat. But we had 500 people on that boat. The mayor of Calgary came out. She spoke. And it was just that first year, we called it Calgary at Collision Yacht Party, because we wanted it to be bigger than us. And, we got so much of that incredible brand drip and notoriety from, hosting it and bringing it all together. But it was the Calgary at Collision party. It was, really intended to be more than a Goodlawyer thing. And, that really, I would say, propelled us to new heights, because the amount of notoriety, drawing the direct ROI from it, challenging. But I can tell you that, Goodlawyer has got to be the best known seed stage company in the country. And I would say that weirdly close to half the people that heard about us the first time heard about us in the context of a yacht. So, go big or go home, I guess.
Yeah. Great story. And appreciate you sharing. Really, really appreciate this, man. Hope you'll do it again sometime. And thanks again.
Absolute pleasure, man. Thanks for having me. And look forward to connecting again sometime soon.